Hello and welcome again to another episode of Battle Ready. It's just me today because the topic is going to be all the stuff you can buy, the hobby tools. What's really helpful and what's sort of marginal. And there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that review painting stuff and hobby stuff and all over the place, and they all have their opinions, but I wanted to sort of take the same approach from somebody who really views this as sort of a hobby, right? I think a lot of times, a lot of the big YouTubers, they have all that information out there, and what they do all day long is build models and prep videos and get all that stuff. And when you're painting and modeling and doing those things that frequently, something that has maybe marginal use for a normal person, a human, right, who's just doing this as a hobby, maybe they find a lot more use for it than it would have for somebody like me. So I wanted to touch base on a couple of things, some that I think are super helpful and really, worth the money in the investment, and other things that I think are okay, and then at least one thing that I think is probably not worth it. So first though, I wanted to talk about the game, right? What we're here to do is play Age of Sigmar, right? The hobby part can be really fun. I love the modeling portion. Not as big a fan of the painting portion, but that's also fun. It's a good use of time and energy, and if it's something that you enjoy. But the number one priority for me is to get games on the table that I really like and that I have a lot of fun with and that are evocative and interesting. And so number one tool, game aids. So this here is my little box of game aids. All of them are amazing. So we've got these little 3-inch tools. These ones I bought on Etsy. I know the Games Workshop probably sells something similar, but they're great because the long end here is 3 inches. This shorter end is 2 inches. This is 1 inch, and this is ½ inch. So you get all the important measuring, especially when it comes to combat and charges. You want to see what the different ranges are. These are great. Now, this also has these sort of blue 6-sided, they're a little on the small side. I think they came in the Soul Wars box, but we've been using them for health, to track model health ever since. They're really good. Small. For larger, we've got D20s, 10s, 12s, a couple of 8s. We have these command points. What's what we use them for? They are I forget what they're called in Age of Sigmar. The coin hammer. I forget. They got a cool name. But they came in, I think, if you pre-ordered the Age of Sigmar 3.0 launch box, I think they came in that. We use them for command points. It's really good. You could use dice. You could use pen and paper, right? It's all good. I like the tactile feel, so we use those. And then we have a couple of extra tokens for various effects in the game. Somebody has Mystic Shield. Somebody calls Finest Hour. We have tokens. You have to sort of remember to look at them. And there's lots of times we mark a model thinking that we're going to, oh yeah, it's marked. It's great. We're going to know it. And then we forget. So nothing's foolproof. But this little box here is all things that help play the game and make the game smoother. And everything in here, I think, is great. I also like this little box. It's, you can just buy this at Home Depot or any hardware shop, really. I think it's supposed to be used to keep lug nuts and screws and things in order. But I use it for this, and it's fantastic. Okay, but before you can play the game, you've got to build the stuff. So when it comes to building, the 3 things you need most, actually you need glue as well. I don't have that here. But the 3 things I think, or actually the 2 things you need are a pair of little clippers and a hobby knife. These clippers I bought on Amazon. I looked for the cheapest clippers and I bought those, and they have helped me build 1,000 models at this point. I don't know, a lot. But the reason I bring that up is because they were like $7. I forget exactly what I paid for them, but not very much. And you look online and there's some very pricey, specialty, hobby-focused ones that go for $50 or more. I'm sure they work great. I'm sure they're fine. Maybe they have a more ergonomic feel in your hand or something. I don't know. But for somebody who wants to do this as a hobby and who enjoys the building, I don't know that I need to spend anything more than $7 for this, right? The clippy outy part is not difficult. It's not hard. It's not confusing. You just go and the piece comes off. So what I would recommend is going for basically the least expensive pair of clippers that you think will still stand up over time. Like I said, I found these on Amazon. They've helped me build many, 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 many models. They're still plenty sharp. Really, really good. When it comes to the hobby knife, everybody needs a hobby knife, an X-Acto blade, right? This one I purchased from the Army Painter. I don't know that I would purchase it again from the Army Painter. I got it early on when I was real excited. And so I was making a paint purchase from the Army Painter. And I was like, hey, well, I'll throw one of those in there, probably to help me get free shipping or whatever. And it's got a little case. But the thing that's real nice about it is that the blades, you unscrew this, the blades are real easy to change. That's not unique to this knife, and I probably overpaid for it. But it has lasted a while. And I think as long as you have a sharp knife that you can use to scrape mold lines, that you can use to get little glibbins off that are left by your hobby nipper sometimes, you need something sharp that'll do that. Any hobby knife is fine. You can probably get a cheaper one than this one. Will work just as fine. But since I have it, I use it, and it works great. And it doesn't need to be anything fancy. Again, this is one of those things where I see online, dedicated hobby knives from companies going for just a lot of money. And I feel like it's probably not worth it. I think you should probably get the least expensive one that you can get that can switch, it's easy to switch the blades, because the blades are going to dull over time. That's how it works. So you don't want to get one that has a fixed blade where you have to throw the whole thing out, or where it's a big process to change the blades, or where it's hard to get new blades. So that's a consideration. But otherwise, just get the cheapest one, right? Don't spend a lot of money. One last thing though, this was the first thing I got that was sort of a nice to have, right? If you're just getting ready to start Age of Sigmar or modeling, maybe you're building your first Underworlds warband, whatever it is, I don't know that you need this, but it is nice to have. So this is a cutting mat, and it's a self-healing cutting mat, which means if I use my hobby knife to slice through, first of all, this protects my table. I'm not cutting into the wood, which would anger my significant other, but also make the blade dull. So, priorities. But it preserves both of that. And when you cut into this, it just sort of comes back together, right? It is a great, great way to also keep your hobby mobile. So I have an area that I like to do a lot of my hobbying in, but sometimes my wife wants to, watch a show with me, or sometimes my kids want to do something. And so I can just take this and basically put it on any surface right on the dining room table. And I know I'm going to be fine. I'm not going to hurt anything. There's not going to be any permanent damage. I'm not going to accidentally cut into the table. So this is a nice to have. It's not a need, but once you know that you're, going to be modeling, that this is going to be a hobby that you invest in a little bit, cutting mat, good. Okay, let's talk about painting. Painting is a whole world of stuff. And I actually think this is where most people get caught up, because they hear the painters online saying, oh, this paint brand is really good, this paint brand is really bad. This paint has good metallics, this paint has good washes, or whatever it is. And I think when you are painting every day and you're noticing the little differences, I think in your mind, for a lot of the people online, it becomes a big thing. It's like, oh yeah, I felt like I was fighting this paint. Oh, this paint was super smooth. And now I haven't tried every paint in the world, for sure. But they all they all sort of seem the same to me. I don't know. Maybe I don't paint enough. I'm not a good painter. Let's get that right out there, right? So maybe other people are seeing things that I'm just too ignorant to observe, right? For sure. But so let's talk about a couple of things. First, everybody should have a palette. I've got this one here. This one I mostly use for dry brushing and if I'm mixing contrast or washes that are already pretty runny, I'll use this palette. So that's what this is for. Mostly. Sometimes I'll use it for other things, but that's mostly. But I think everybody should get a wet palette. So here's my Army Painter wet palette. Again, it's Army Painter. Probably trying to get free shipping. You can make these yourself. There's some great videos online how to make yourself a wet palette. But the wet palette does two things that are just phenomenal from my perspective. The first, and I mean, they do a lot of things that are good, like your paints will last longer and so on and so forth over a dry palette where they will dry out. But the number one thing that it does, I think, is that your paint, like I said, your paints last longer. I think that I end up wasting or even using just a lot less paint. And sometimes stuff will even be there for over multiple days where I'll pour a blur in, I'll paint, there'll be a little bit left, I didn't get to it. I'll come back a couple days later to paint and it's still usable. And so I don't have to pour more paint onto my palette. I can use that paint. That's not always the case, right? Sometimes the paint separates and it gets a little ooky. But the ability to avoid wasting paint that comes with the wet palette is really, really, really good. I can't tell you how many times on my dry palette, I used to have a big dry, it was like a piece of glass or acrylic or something, but I had a big dry palette. Sometimes I'd be painting, especially in the summer, it doesn't get humid here, it's pretty dry in the summer, and I'd pour out a blop, and I'd get halfway through the unit, doing everybody's shoes or whatever, and then it would be dry, and I'd have to pour more out. And it uses up a lot of paint. And paint is not cheap. It's not super expensive, but it's not cheap either. It's not cheap at all. So the more I can use use devices like a wet palette to help conserve the paint, the better. The other thing that's nice about it is I'm pretty bad about thinning paints usually. Um, I just want to put paint on a model, right? Now sometimes the paint is way too thick, or sometimes you're painting a very small area, so you need to make sure that it's thinned right. But the wet palette really helps with that. The moisture will seep in, and a lot of times it seeps in enough that I don't feel the need to thin any further. And then sometimes when I am looking for a particular consistency, it's very easy to add just a little water and create that consistency because it's a wet palette anyway, right? So even if I overdo it a little bit, that water is going to go into the sponge, it's going to run in. It's great. So the wet palette, if you are at all investing, just like the cutting board, if you are at all investing in stuff like this for the hobby, you think I'm going to do this, the wet palette is really, really good. Now, I know people that are much better painters than me can use it for other things as well. It's got far more utility than what I'm using it for. But just as let's keep this hobby, within budget, it's a great tool, a great tool. You don't have to, like I said, you don't have to get the one from the Army Painter. I ended up getting it for free shipping, and also because I hate having to make my own paper that goes in there. I just don't like doing that. And being able to say, all right, I'll just go to Army Painter and buy another stack of 50 sheets or whatever they sell them in. That was good. Now, also this. And brushes. So let's talk about brushes. Most people online talk about having one or two really nice brushes that hold a really good point and can do a bunch of stuff. I don't. I mostly buy pretty inexpensive brushes, use them till they explode, and then buy another set. I have bought one nice brush before, but the thing is, and I brought brush soap and everything, and I cleaned it all the time, after each session. One, it's a hassle to have to do that. And two, it did last a little bit longer than the cheapy brushes, but not a lot longer. And for me, it wasn't worth the additional time and investment to have that kind of brush. So I just use brushes that I know aren't going to last forever. I get a big grip of them, and then when they go bad, I've got some here like this one, or the makeup brushes make great dry brushes. I've got some larger ones that I use for mixing because they can sop up a bunch of paint. I'll put it in the palette, sop up the next color, mix it in. Works great for that. But for actual brushwork on the model, I tend to rotate through. I'm not a big believer in buying expensive brushes at all. All right. As for this thing, uh, it was showing up on my Instagram feed all the time. I was on whatever algorithm showed that I was in the painting world or whatever. I think it's called the Paint Puck. It's fine. It's fine. I got it. This came as part of a Christmas gift, so thank you to whoever bought it for me. Um, but it's fine. It has this bottom. I don't know if you can see it, but it has this bottom that's supposed to help get paint off. I don't I don't know if it does that, but I do like this ring around that lets me help put my paintbrushes so that they dry with the water dripping down. Right? If you have them the other way, the water drips down into the metal part, into the ferrule, and that can cause the brushes to die a little bit easier. So I had been placing them flat, which is better, but being able to place them like this, I have noticed that my brushes do tend to last a little bit longer. They keep that point a little bit longer because they're facing down. I can't recall how expensive this is. I'm not recommending that anybody go out and buy it, but it is a nice to have. And since I have it, it is something that I use. Okay, what about paint? So the most important thing that you see here is actually this paint rack. It's made out of acrylic. It's very inexpensive. I think it was about $15 on um, Amazon. But this paint rack is not a paint rack. It is a rack for holding nail polish, which is great. It's big enough for Pro Acryl. It's big enough for Citadel. You can shove in a ton of Army Painter and Vallejo in here. It holds a lot, a lot, a lot. I have 3 of these in my painting area because I have way too much paint and I went overboard, and that's a whole different thing. But this paint rack is really, really, really good. Prior to this, I just sort of had a box that I had all my paints in, and it was a pain. It was a pain. Especially if you have a dedicated space, right? Where you're like, this is my hobby space. This is my den. This is my man cave. This is my she shed, right? Whatever you have, something like this is really, really, really convenient. It's easy to see. I like to organize by the rainbow, red to purple, right? Because I'm a nerd, I guess. I don't know, but that's really good. As for the paints themselves, like I said, I think people put way too much stock in paint and paint companies. I've used Pro Acryl. Pro Acryl is great. In fact, I love their white. Their white is probably the best white that I've used. What's it called? Bold titanium white. Bold titanium white. I love Citadel effects paints. So I've got Ard Coat. I've got the 2 mediums. I've got Blood for the Blood God, Nihilic Oxide. I have several different of the texture paints. Really, 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 really like that stuff. And then I've got a bunch of the shades. I like Citadel shades and contrast and effects paints a lot. I'm sure there's other stuff that works just as well. That's just the one that I happen to like. As for solid colors, I think Citadel does great in having a lot of colors because sometimes there's a particular green that you want or a particular yellow. So I think that's good. But most of the time, I mean, like I said, I've used a lot of these Pro Acryls, but most of the time I use Army Painter paints. I really like Army Painter, largely because of the price. They might not be, some people say, oh, they're hard to work with, or they don't do what I want, or can't blend as nicely. That hasn't been my experience. But again, I'm not a great painter. I'm not a great painter. So maybe once you get to higher levels, if you're trying to go parade ready, display quality, golden demon, something like that, then maybe you don't use Army Painter. Maybe that's not what it's for. But if you want a battle ready army on the table, something that you can enjoy and be proud of on the table as opposed to in a display case, Army Painter is great. It's inexpensive, wide range of colors. I'm not a super fan of their shades, and their metallics are a little hit and miss for me. I like their silvers. Don't like their golds. Um, but overall, Army Painter's great. And so I know they sometimes get a little bit of a bad rap, but I'm in it. I haven't tried their speed paints. That's because I already have so many. I've sort of invested a lot into the contrast. So to buy it all again in speed paint form, I don't know. I know they're coming out with speed paint metallics. So I'm interested in those, but we'll see. We'll see. And then, yeah, so as far as paints go, get the inexpensive ones, but do get hobby paint. So if you go to the craft store and get, apple barrel paints and stuff like that, you're probably going to have a hard time. The consistency is just not, the consistency of the paint, not the across bottles. But the consistency is pretty gloopy in comparison. My first models I painted up with that kind of stuff. It's totally workable. If that's what you like, great. If that's all you can afford, you can certainly enjoy the hobby because it is much less expensive. But that is really the only paint that I found was really difficult to work with, especially if you're going to do detail stuff, right? You're going to do an edge highlight or you're going to, dot an eye and a pupil. That kind of stuff is really hard. It's really difficult to work with. So something that's made for the hobby, Army Painter, Vallejo, AK, Pro Acryl, Citadel, whatever, I think they're all probably fine. And at that point, I would go with, unless there's a particular color that you want that only one of them provides, I would just go with whatever is the least expensive. And frankly, if your monsters are a slightly different shade of green from the monster that is on the box art, you're fine. It's totally fine. Okay, last I wanted to talk about paint handles. So I never really got the paint handle thing. I know a lot of people swear by them. A lot of people make their own, and that gives them something to hold while they're painting the model on top. So the thing that stopped me from ever getting one is that there was no. I like to do batch painting. I like to paint a whole unit at once. So I'll go this guy, pants, next guy, pants, next guy, pants, next guy, pants, next guy, pants. Back to the first guy, shirt, next guy, shirt, next guy, shirt, next guy, shirt. That's sort of how I like to paint. And to take them on and off and on and off and on and off, it just seemed like too much of a hassle. So there was a Kickstarter for these guys, and they have a removable top. So you put all the guys on the top, and then to put them on, they're just held on by magnets. So take them off, put the next guy on. Take them off, put the next guy on. Great, solved the problem. So I ended up getting it. I don't know that I would get this. In fact, I know that I wouldn't get this again. It wasn't super expensive. It was normal price for how much these things go, but it was just I just don't use it. I don't use it. I way more prefer to just hold the model and paint it up, especially if it's got a bigger base, and hold it up, than to put it on one of these things. And I don't know. It's a lot of hassle. Now I know some people say, well, this keeps your hand from cramping because if you're holding the model like this, maybe your hand cramps. And this is much more natural to hold. Maybe. I have never had a problem with my hand cramping from painting models. And again, maybe I don't paint like the other people do, as many as they do. But I feel like if you're, just enjoying the hobby and you paint from time to time, hand free. Paint holder, not. And then even having it, like I said, I've put up groups of 20 on these things and then just gone one batch painting, and it's fine. It's fine, but I don't like that it makes them top heavy, so this thing is falling. It's got a stand that helps, but I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't know. I just don't like it. I don't. I have a hard time sort of explaining because it's not bad. Nothing about it is bad. Nothing about it makes me say, oh, I can't ever use this again. It hurt my hand. Or, oh, it's got sharp parts. Or, oh, no, nothing like that. It's just, it was always easier or more convenient. In fact, the last time I did this, I started just picking the guys up by these things and painting it rather than putting it on this and then holding this. Now, I might be unique in that. Obviously, these things sell, right? So there must be a lot of people who enjoy using the paint handles. That's not something that is necessary for me. Will I ever use this again? Maybe the time will come and I'll try it again and I'll really love it. But having used this for 3 or 4 squads now to like really give it a go, I don't foresee myself using this. And by this, I mean any paint handle in the foreseeable future. So anyway, those were the products that I've had a lot of experience with, the ones that I think have made the most difference in my hobbying. I think that when it comes to this, sometimes people can get overwhelmed. They say, oh, I need to get these brushes and these paints. I need a palette and I need that painting handles and I need lighting and I need a special chair. And I need You don't. You don't need any of that nonsense. Now, if you find that you're very involved and you've been doing it a long time, and you're like, yeah, I would like to upgrade my painting space. Awesome, right? That's awesome. But my goal here is to say none of that is necessary, even though I've been painting for a long time. Well, not as long as some people, but I mean, for the past several years, putting armies together. We've got, 11 armies or whatever we have now. Even though I've been doing all that and building and painting, and I still feel like, there's a lot of things out there that are just sort of cash grabs, right? Things that are out there just to get your money. And like I said, some of this stuff I did because of laziness, like the Army Painter wet palette, where I can get the paper easier, right? If I was a little bit more industrious, I would just make my own and get my own paper and be happy with that. So you can get away with far less than what I've shown here. But these are the things that have improved my experience, both in playing and painting. And so I wanted to make sure that I put that out there. And for anything else, anything that goes any farther beyond this, it's not necessary, right? Now, if it's something you want to do, great. And I think the one caveat I want to say is, lots of times you see, especially little clickbaity thumbnails on YouTube, that'll say things like, this one trick boosted my painting 100% or whatever. It's all lies. And the fact that you're switching from Army Painter to Vallejo or from Citadel to AK Interactive, that is going to do nothing for your painting. Don't spend a lot of money thinking that the money is going to make you a better painter or a better player or a better gamer or whatever it is, that it's going to improve your hobby. It's not. What's going to make you better is practice, is doing it, and over time. And then you might get to a point where you decide, you know what, now that I know so much, I can tell why Army Painter and Citadel are a little bit different from Pro Acryl and Vallejo, right? And then based on that, I can sort of create my collection of paints that I personally like a lot. And that's cool. But don't feel, especially in the beginning, don't feel like you have to run out and get a bunch of toys to make the fun part better. You don't. The fun part's the fun part. The toys are just little helpers, and only get the ones that actually help. Well, this has been another episode of Battle Ready. Thanks so much for watching.